The NHL cannot stay out of its own way on a lot of different issues. On today's Locked On Flames.
Your Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames, presented by Birddogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNHL, and when you enter promo code Locked On, they'll throw in one of these free custom Yeti-style tumblers with every single order. I know I have been using this every single day since I got it. On today's episode of Locked On Flames, we are going to be touching on the reports that Joel Quenneville is having a meeting sometime in the near future with Gary Bettman about his possible reinstatement to the NHL. Former Blackhawks general manager Stan Bowman also down that same path, and why it all fits within the same overarching theme of hockey's inability to just do the right thing. But hope everybody is enjoying their Friday. It's Friday. The weekend's here. Hopefully, where you are, the weather's supposed to be nice this weekend. You're able to enjoy it a little bit more. This episode, I'm going to quote a musician who gives a preface before he sings a protest song at one of his concerts. The point of the song is to not have to keep doing the song. And the hope in doing episodes like this is that we can make people more aware. We can talk about these topics that are sensitive. And I understand that's part of why it's hard for some people to talk about this type of stuff, why some people are reticent to get involved in the first place, why the league's television partners and the reporters who are employed by those television partners don't touch base on these important topics, because it's ugly, it's uncomfortable, it's the worst aspects of humanity being associated with hockey. You know, hockey is supposed to be fun, enjoyable, something to bring people together, to make them feel like they belong, like they're part of something. And to repeatedly have to keep banging the drum that we want this to be an inclusive space where everybody can just enjoy the game. And then you have news reports like this morning where Darren Dreger of TSN reported that former Blackhawks, Panthers, Blues coach Joel Quenneville is supposed to have a meeting with Gary Bettman at some point in the next few weeks about getting reinstatement to the league. This jives with what we've heard from other reports. There have been reports, I believe it was Monday of last week, where Elliot Friedman on 32 Thoughts had said that Joel Quenneville would be eligible for reinstatement, but probably not at a timeline commensurate with getting a job for this upcoming summer. But that depends. It really does depend on how the situation plays out. And let's take a step back here. Before we really start focusing on the past, talking about why we shouldn't let these people back into our sport, and I say our because it's ours. We're the fans. We are the reason they are there. We are the reason that these people have the jobs they do. If we all stopped watching, the NHL would have to change. I understand that you're never going to be able to galvanize the type of action to get that meaningful change from hockey fans. But for the purposes of this conversation, our game. What we know that these types of reports where people who work for the major television partners like Sportsnet, like TSN, they're doing a job. They are reporting information because somebody wants that information out there. I don't think it's a coincidence that there was reports earlier today that Stan Bowman had talked to a number of teams about potentially taking a job in their front office the same day that the Toronto Maple Leafs and Kyle Dubas agreed to part ways. And that tells you that that narrative that Bowman had talked to other teams about their jobs, is out there for a reason. There's a conversation going on. There's a reason that we have to deal with information reported the way it is. That tells me another thing. Also tells me that at the very least, the NHL is okay with this idea. It corroborates, yeah, words are hard sometimes, corroborates the narrative we've heard that there will be a way for these guys back in when the commissioner feels like they've met a certain threshold and once he's had a chance to meet with both of them. Because this is going to be front page news if and when it does happen. I remember, I forget who mentioned it in their column, if it was in The Athletic or if it was in one of the local New York publications. But when Joel Quenneville was officially rebuffed as a candidate for the Rangers job, someone had mentioned in one of the subsequent paragraphs of that story is that's not just a sports story. That becomes a New York Times editorial page story where what does this say about the culture of forgiveness in sports? What does this say about sexual misconduct in sports? And all of that becomes a public relations groundswell. You get real pushback. It won't just be the hockey fans pushing back on that. You will get activist groups. You will get the victims of sexual assault survivor groups coming out and vehemently opposing the hiring of either of these individuals for their role in that cover-up. So got a few minutes left in this segment here, and we'll touch on it now. So in 2010, the Blackhawks are playing the Sharks in the Western Conference Finals. The Blackhawks defeat the Sharks, and between the layoff of the end of the conference finals and the start of the Stanley Cup Finals, Brad Aldrich, the video coach on the Chicago Blackhawks, sexually assaults Kyle Beach, a black ace, somebody who had been in the AHL with the Blackhawks that season, but was not on the active roster. He was there as an emergency call-up, where if somebody on the main roster had gotten hurt, he could have been activated. He was there to practice, there to be ready if the team needed him, like all hockey players always are, trying to do whatever they can to help the team. All that happens. The assault happens. Beach tells one of the support staff coaches, and the support staff coach tells John McDonough, the president of hockey operations, who pulls everybody important into that room. A bunch of different coaches, the assistant GM, and they all talk about what they're going to do. And in that meeting, Joel Quenneville expresses frustration that they're talking about this, that this could disrupt the team. If we take any steps now, that this could disrupt the team. It's really hard to get this far. And he's quoted as saying this in the Jenner and Block report, which it's 106 pages. I understand that's very long. I read it when it first came out. I read it this morning before I wrote something for my Substack and before doing this episode to kind of refresh my memory, to kind of really remember the details, because the broad strokes everybody knows, but the details are what matters here. And Joel Quenneville expressing frustration that this could be a distraction to the team as opposed to something that needs to be rectified as soon as possible. That tells me all I need to know about Joel Quenneville as a person and by extension a coach. A coach is supposed to be a leader, somebody that is a bastion of morality, is supposed to guide a team through difficult situations. If he's faced with a difficult situation that's outside of hockey and he immediately defaults back to hockey, that tells me he's emotionally stunted and not mature enough to be leading other people. You can say what you want about the success, the Stanley Cups, etc., but if you're putting hockey before the well-being of another person, you have to be able to take a step back and remove yourself from it and say, this is just a game. I need to make sure that this person is okay, and that if this happened, there were consequences for the person who did it. Not only did nobody in that room take any action, John McDonough, the president, had said, I'll take care of this, don't worry. Nobody ever followed up. The season ended. They won the Stanley Cup. The performance evaluations for the end of season were done. Aldrich was allowed to leave the Blackhawks with no investigation, no publicity, no accusation alleged against him officially. He left quietly. That performance evaluation was tied to him. He got a job at Miami of Ohio University, where he was credibly accused of sexual misconduct 2 more times. And then he got a job as a high school coach in the state of Michigan, where he was charged with unlawful sexual contact with a minor a couple of years after leaving the Blackhawks. All because the Blackhawks did not take any initiative in trying to get to the bottom of what happened, to do the right thing, or just show basic compassion here. Kyle Beach's life was never the same after what happened to him, and he was just dubbed another bust because his hockey value dissipated. He didn't have any value as a hockey player anymore, so the Blackhawks couldn't be bothered with trying to understand what went wrong. That's really what's so unfortunate about all of this is The culture of hockey reinforces all of these decisions, which we're going to keep talking about in the second segment, where we're going to talk a little bit more about hockey culture. But first, we have got to talk about the comfiest shorts imaginable. I am currently wearing the Birddogs I got sent with my tumbler here. I'm going to take a sip of water from my very convenient tumbler. These are the most comfortable shorts imaginable. I have 2 pairs. I have been rotating back and forth. I did a wash in the middle of the week, so I would have them to wear again. I went and hung out with my girlfriend yesterday. I wore these while I was hanging out with her. I'm wearing the other pair right now because these are the comfiest shorts I own. When I'm done recording the podcast, I'm going to go work out. I can wear these shorts to work out. I can wear these shorts out on a date. They are that versatile, that comfortable. They are so breathable. There's no chafing on your thighs when you're running, working out in these. Makes it very nice. They've got a variety of lengths. I am a 5-inch inseam person because it is suns out, thighs out. It is that time of year. And before we get to the next part, I do want to say, if you go to birddogs.com/lockedon and you enter the promo code LOCKEDONNHL, they will throw in one of these tumblers with every single order. So not only will you have the most comfortable shorts imaginable that you can wear to work out, to wear on a date, you get one of these tumblers and you get to let everybody else know, hey, I got a branded tumbler. My gift from the internet came this week. Yours didn't. You should get on this. I want to thank everyone for hanging out on this Friday. Jess is on her way to go see Taylor Swift at Gillette Stadium this weekend. Why I'm holding it down here today. I want to thank everybody for making Locked On Flames first listen. Your team every single day. And as this offseason drones along, Jess and I are going to have a ton of great content to keep you guys interested, even if the Flames never make a decision on who their coach or general manager is going to be. We can operate safely under the assumption that Joel Quenneville will not be coaching the Chicago Blackhawks, which is a good thing. We cannot make that same assumption about Stan Bowman not becoming the general manager of the Calgary Flames, because a guy like Bowman is going to have to take whatever job comes his way. The Flames aren't the most ideal landing spot for somebody trying to kind of get their feet back in and firmly entrench themselves, because they have so many big roster decisions to make. Very quickly, you're going to understand what the GM that's brought in is going to do. But getting back to our topic today, more about the culture of hockey that allows behavior like this to persist. Hockey is intuitively about the team. It is always the team, the team, the team. It is we, not I. I mentioned this in my Substack article. The NHL produced a commercial whose title is We Greater Than I, but centered around the idea of, in interviews with the stars of the game after a team wins in the playoffs, you have them always saying, well, we got pucks in deep. Well, we did a good job. We battled, as opposed to other sports where you might be more inclined to hear an athlete say, well, I made this play, or I saw this, or I made this happen. And it's purely mythologizing, fetishizing what the collective wants to hear. The humble, the good Canadian, good American boy nature, that these are hardworking, blue-collar guys who go to work every day and do their best to play the right way. The problem with that idea is when you make it about the team, the team, the team, and you dehumanize people by making them parts of something bigger than themselves. That's not to say there isn't value in getting buy-in. That is an inherent part of a successful team, is getting everybody to put some of their individuality aside to come together as a group. But when you make it so rooted in the fundamental ideas of the sport that the team is more important than your own well-being, that's when you start getting decisions like this. People say they can't understand how Joel Quenneville, Bowman, the other people involved in this situation allowed it to just persist and then never followed up or did anything about it. I can. Their superior, John McDonough, told them, I'll take care of it. In hockey, that is all you need to hear. If you're superior, if you're a player on the team and your captain says, I'll take care of it. If you're a player and you tell a coach, you assume the coach will take care of it. A coach tells the other part of the coaching staff in the front office, you assume that, okay, the president knows what to do because they're the president. They've had this job. They got to this point in their respective hockey careers because they know these people fall back on their principles. These are hockey lifers. Joel Quenneville played 800-something games in his NHL career. He had coached almost 1,000 games by the time this happened in the spring of 2021. 1,000 games as a coach, 800 as a player. Joel Quenneville's identity is the sport of hockey. The sport of hockey roots itself in not doing anything to disrupt the team because nobody's more important than the team, even in these types of situations. And this is where you start getting into the generational gap, where the younger people in today's game have a better touch, are more in touch with what is the proper course of behavior for this. We have modernized, we've made information more accessible. Younger people are more aware of the protections that exist, the proper channels which to report behavior like this to get a better outcome. An older generation guy like Joel Quenneville, who, 50-something years old when this happened in 2010, 60, I think 4 now. This is somebody who grew up in a very different world. Somebody who grew up in the 50s and 60s, who played professional hockey through the 70s and 80s, and then became a coach in the early 2000s and coached for a significant portion of his life. This is somebody whose entire identity is the sport of hockey. We talk about Bowman. Bowman is the son of the most successful hockey coach in the history of hockey. He had his foot in the door of hockey culture before he was ever playing organized hockey. He was always around those Canadians teams. He was around the subsequent teams that Bowman went on to coach. You are in the sport. You are in the culture. And I made this comparison, and it's a bit extreme, yes, but it's really not that different from organized crime, where you have a fierce power structure where you always know who you need to report to. You don't tell anybody what's going on unless they're in your chain of command. You don't complain down. You don't complain outside. You do what you're told, no questions asked. And if the day comes where something bad is going to happen and somebody's going to have to take consequences, well, the leaders don't take consequences. They pass the buck further down the ladder until they find somebody who can do some jail time. Everybody knows the scene in Goodfellas at the beginning of the movie where Robert De Niro puts the $100 in young Henry Hill's pocket. You took a pinch. Yeah, everybody gets pinched. Yeah, but you did it like a man. You kept your mouth shut and you didn't rat on your friends. That's what's going on here. Those guys did not go outside the chain of command. They did their 18 months. Both of them, both Bowman and Quenneville, left their posts in the fall of 2021. It is May of 2023, less than 18 months. And both guys are going to get serious consideration for jobs again. And we're going to talk about in the third segment why it's all so ridiculous, because we spent that fall of 2021 listening to hockey media, people on or within hockey organizations say, well, we're going to do things differently now. We're going to be more sensitive. We're going to be more aware of this. It was always facetious. It was always lip service. And that's really something I'm going to harp on coming up in the third segment. But when you hear people say things like, we're going to change, words are hollow, actions are concrete. What meaningful changes does the league have in place? Has the league put in place since then? What have Joel Quenneville and Stan? Yeah, Stan. Whenever I talk about the Bowmans, I am inclined to mix Scotty and Stan up. I'm sorry about that. Whenever Stan Bowman says, oh, I learned this, or I'm a different person now. How? You went to a couple workshops, you had some workplace sensitivity training. I'm supposed to believe that's going to usurp the previous 50-something years of your life growing up in this sport, that a couple of workshops, maybe a book or two, some God, man, words are hard sometimes. When you think about it, how is a workshop, a seminar, a book, a pamphlet, therapy, how are any of those things supposed to change somebody's entire existence? It's hard for me to believe that a year and a half later that these guys actually took meaningful effort into their supposed re-education, rehabilitation, as Larry Brooks of the New York Post called it, versus just saying whatever they need to say. There's a clear formula now for getting readmittance once you've broken one of the core tenets now. There's a public relations manual to getting back in and falling in line and not messing up. That's all you're going to hear. I don't know if Bowman or Quenneville are going to get hired this cycle, but there's a real chance that next summer we're back here again, and then we're talking about this concretely. Like, what have they learned in their 2 years away? And is a year and a half that significant of a penalty for guys who very clearly were always looking to get right back in the game, regardless of how much they actually did. And that's really what sticks to me, is that these guys very clearly did not understand the consequences of their actions, because they've shown no contrition. Joel Quenneville was lying about his involvement in this meeting, which is on the record, which multiple people in that room have placed him in the room, and characterized his emotions and quoted him as saying he was frustrated, that it was really hard for the Blackhawks to get that far, and that this would disrupt the team. How is somebody who thinks like that going to get changed by a couple of meetings, some books? That I'll leave you with. And I want to thank everybody once again for tuning in this late Friday afternoon. It is mid-May now. It is allergy season. If you are watching on YouTube, which I highly encourage, if you have the time to watch on YouTube, the means of watching on YouTube, you should, because you get a little bit more flavor. You get to see the facial, the hand expressions. You get to see the set dressing, all that good stuff. You can see my nose is very red. The allergies have come from my neck. The air purifier is off right now as I'm recording this, so definitely feeling a bit labored in my breathing right now. Still going to suck it up and go run later. But before we move on, I do want to focus on this main idea before we wrap up, call it a weekend. What has the NHL learned from this situation? We don't know, because the NHL is very clearly operating under the assumption that once Gary Bettman, the commissioner of the league, has spoken to Quenneville, Bowman, or anybody who's involved in a scandal or accused of something bad, Gary is the unilateral arbiter of justice. That is the way these sports leagues are set up. Bomani Jones likens the NFL to a cartel. They have the only product in the marketplace. They control everything. It's why the commissioners are good punching bags. They take the ire off of the owners. Gary is going to sit down. He's going to talk to Quenneville. And if Gary deems Quenneville acceptable for readmittance, the clubs all can plead ignorance. Well, Gary says he's okay. If Gary says he's okay, we can hire him. Even though they all spent the fall of 2021, Gary included, saying we need to do a better job of protecting people. We need to do a better job of being sensitive. So what changed? How are you going to sell me on this? I cannot emphasize this enough. This is exactly how organized crime works. Not everybody in professional hockey is involved in this. Not everybody in professional hockey is a bad person. I do want to reiterate that. There are bad apples within that group, though. And when you use the bad apples terminology, when you say, no, the culture at large isn't what's bad, it's a few people individually, you can just lop those few people out, cut them off, excommunicate them, and then everybody can throw their hands up and say, well, we got rid of them. What else do you want us to do? And they don't have to actually institute any fundamental changes. And that's what's challenging about this. This is not something that changes overnight. This is something that takes multiple generations to correct. This starts with kids at the youth level. This starts with people playing junior hockey and all the way up that ladder to guys who are general managers and presidents. How do you fundamentally change a culture? It is not an overnight process. It is not a couple of workshops, some books, some laminated folders. It is not any of those things. It is long-range institutional education. It is changing the way we think about these types of hiring process. Because when you hire a Joel Quenneville, when you hire a Stan Bowman, you're saying, yeah, we know what they did is bad, but we think they can help us win. And that morally makes you no better than them. That makes you morally the same as those guys who said, well, our boss said he's going to take care of it. In this case, that's Gary, is going to take care of this situation. Once our boss takes care of it, it's out of my hands. He said it's okay. He's going to take care of it. So he's got the superior seal of approval. I don't have to do anything. Now it's about winning. It is the exact same situation. Just by association now. Sure, all of these people involved know that what happened was wrong. Joel Quenneville was lying about his involvement in this situation up until he was forced to resign. He coached a game after he was fingered as being in the room, then had to go to Florida to meet with Gary Bettman, where Gary Bettman very clearly sat him down and said, you can resign or I'm unilaterally suspending you. Quenneville resigned. Now, year and a half later, they're going to operate under the assumption that because Gary says it's okay, everybody's okay with this. Now it's back to being about winning. The actions themselves, well, it's not good. They'll do charity stuff. They'll do like, oh, well, as part of this hiring, this team is going to give money to charity X to support victims of sexual misconduct or to enable better mandatory report policy. All of the types of lip service stuff that these multi-billion-dollar organizations know they need to say in order to avoid public scrutiny. Because there are people out there who just don't care, frankly. They want to see their favorite team win. They don't care who's on their favorite team, what their favorite team does. They just want to see them win. That is why you will see an NHL team hire both of these people within the next year or so. It could be as soon as this summer where both guys get hired. I think more likely, based on what we've heard, it'll be in season or next year when they'll both be available to become full-time members of the boys club again. They're still doing their bid. That's what I compared it to. They did a short stint in prison, and everybody knows, as that famous scene in Goodfellas where, cutting up the garlic with the razor, getting the really thin pieces so it liquefies in the sauce. If you're watching on YouTube, you see me here doing the very precise cutting gesture like I had a razor blade in my hand. That's all he did. Hockey guys don't go to real jail. They didn't get consequences. They lost their jobs. Okay. These are both guys who've been significantly well off for a while. Guys making 6-figure, 7-figure salaries for an extended period of time. A year and a half? I'm really supposed to feel that's a meaningful consequence of what happened to Kyle Beach. A year and a half off, and the Blackhawks got fined money, which they've since made up. They got fined $2 million. They won the draft lottery a week and a half ago. They really learned their lesson. They won 3 championships and a draft lottery. That really showed the Blackhawks the errors of their ways. It's all so frustrating. And it sucks to have to do episodes like this, especially on a Friday. Usually if I'm doing a Friday episode, you get to be a little chipper, looking forward to the weekend, got plans, be outside, adult beverages, the sun, the fun parts of the warmer months. But when you see news like that and you're not immediately just like throwing your hands up in frustration, it sucks, man. You want to see that these leagues are trying to do better as opposed to just lip service. It really is frustrating. So, on that note, excuse me, I do want to remind everyone to subscribe to Locked On Flames over your podcasts. We will be back next week. Lots of compelling offseason content. Apparently, the Flames are on that final benchmark where they're expected to hire a general manager at some point in the next week or so. We will have instant live reaction no matter where I am, what I am doing. If I am at a baseball game, if I am at a concert, I will be live streaming a reaction because you guys need to know what's going on because we are Locked On Flames and we got your team covered every single day. We will see you guys next week.